A few years ago, Carol Ann and I were in Bangkok, Thailand for a few days, and we were staying and touring around a bit. And we had a great younger fellow who was touring us around. And there's a lot of unrest going on in Bangkok at that time, such that one afternoon we couldn't get back to the hotel except by being transported up the river. And when we were leaving, the morning we were leaving, it was not clear whether we're going to get from downtown Bangkok out to the airport. We did, but there was an awful lot of unrest and demonstrations going on against the existing government. Now, after a day or so, I began to keep an eye on the young fellow who was touring us around, and he always looked kind of exhausted. It looks like he'd been up all night. And we learned that the demonstrations were going on all night. So one morning I said, "You're part of the demonstrations at night," and he said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "Well, you guys, I'm not clear what's really going on here, so kind of fill me in. What do you want?" And he said, "Well, we'll know after we topple the government. We don't really know at this point what we want. We haven't really discussed that, but." You serious? You're out there tearing things down, but you don't have an idea of what it is that you would like to be in its place. Does this sound like defund the police to you? Does this sound like abolish ICE to you? Because if you don't want the police, then what kind of public safety do you want? And if you don't want public safety, then what do you want? Anarchy? You want people breaking in your house, raping your wife and your daughter, stealing your stuff? And if you don't want 20 million, 10 million and 20 million people to come cruising into our country just unannounced and breaking our law, and if you don't want them to be taken away, at least the really bad actors among them, what do you want? And it's really not clear to me what it is that they do want, other than they're against Trump, got that, President Trump, who was, by the way, popularly elected, got more votes than anybody else in 2024 and got more electoral votes than anybody else. So he is a duly elected fellow. But anyway, all right, so you want sanctuary cities and you want direct demonstrations and so on. So now this reminds me of the problem historically that Richard Nixon had in the 1960 election when he was trying to solidify his support in the Republican Party. Now, Nixon had been vice president under Dwight Eisenhower from 1953 to 1961. And now Nixon was running for president against John F. Kennedy, who would ultimately win. But Nixon was trying to get the more liberal wing of the Republican Party behind him, and that meant he had to get a fellow by the name of Nelson Rockefeller, one of the famous Rockefeller sons, who had been governor of New York and was a power in the Republican Party. And so they met on Fifth Avenue in New York City and sat down and had a little chat. And when it was over, it was clear that Nixon maybe had made some sort of bargain with Rockefeller, but maybe not. And the reason, if not, was because a truism, which was Nelson Rockefeller didn't want anything. And when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't want anything, how do you deal with them? Or if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't know what they want, people in streets in Thailand that we encountered, or perhaps the anti-ICE and defund the police people. So, all right, what's going on? What's really going on here? And there is some explanation which is being offered, which is plays off a book in research that was called the Fourth Turning, and this is a successor to a book written by William Strauss and Neil Howe, and published in the last couple of years. And the Fourth Turning, you can look, sort of in the Bible for this, and it's the spring, summer, winter, fall, and spring's renewal in the summer, and so forth and so on. But as these fellows define the Fourth Turning, it's an era of destruction, and often involving war or revolution, and in which institutional life is destroyed and rebuilt in response to a perceived threat to the nation's survival. That's very interesting. That's a potential explanation, if you subscribe to these thoughts, of what's going on right now in our country. But it isn't just our country. You're seeing anti-ICE raids in Italy and other places in the world. This pushing back against institutions is taking root around the world. And if you want to follow what the belief is, or if you want to, a solution, and maybe just a simple solution, then you might consider that we are in the Fourth Turning, which is the period of destruction and so on, which is always followed in this thinking by a rejuvenation, a spring, if you will. From winter comes the spring and renewal and regeneration, and we're off into a different world. And this thinking here, and those who subscribe to this are saying that we're into this period of destruction and anarchy and perhaps war for a number of years to come yet, and perhaps we will emerge from it, and they think maybe around 2030 or 2035 or so. But they also point back through our history to the Civil War, which was in the 1860s, to World War I, which was started in 1914, World War II in 1939 in England, 1949 involving the United States. And then when the war was over, these wars were over, we had an enormous period of growth post-Civil War in the United States. And we had an enormous prosperity in the 1950s following the end of the World War II. And indeed, we have a really lovely period in the 1990s after the Cold War ended. So we're kind of looking at notes that we have taken here from it. These guys also would say that the Fourth Turning began in 2008 with the economic meltdown. I think you could also throw President Obama into this mix. Obama's the one who said, with a pen and a phone, I can do whatever I want. And with presidential fiats, if you will. And so if Congress won't act and give me what I want, and the Supreme Court won't do it, well, I can just do it. Folks, that's not our system. We need Congress, and we need judges looking at things independently. So I do think the economic turndown in 2008 marked a turn, but I also think the attitude on the part of our presidents since that time. And gosh, if you look at what President Trump is doing, he's almost governing by presidential citations here. So we'll have to see what happens here. But I will say now about my attitude towards Trump, who I voted for in 2016. I was voting against Hillary Clinton, folks. And in 2024, who I voted against Biden, who was pretty well demonstrated as a crook, and never held an account for that. And then in 2024 against Kamala Harris, who, anyway, and Trump got, again, he got a majority of votes against Kamala Harris, and so on. But just because I vote for somebody doesn't mean I should continue to support him forever. I mean, I voted for Obama in 2008, and he almost immediately decided that when the Nobel Peace Prize was offered to him, he decided, yes, well, I should have the Nobel Peace Prize. For what? And you go, something's amiss here. And then not long after that, we had this other things that called me to wonder about him. But I've wondered about every president, even though I voted for them or not. And I'm certainly wondering about Mr. Trump now, who's letting his outsized ego get even larger. I point to the Donald Trump, John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. What are you doing? You know, I point to tearing down the East Wing and building a ballroom. You know, come on, go run there's got enough time and trouble running this government and trying to bind up the country, which is it's almost evenly divided. And also, you know, we're not really communicating with one another, and we're not looking at the other side. We're ascribing immorality to people who we disagree with. Not immoral; they just think differently than you do, and they're not dangerous. We don't take them off the street and lock them up and so on. But you know, this sort of Trump hating is a real problem. Now, against this backdrop, anything else going on really of interest, really of importance in the world, in the country, besides, I don't know, getting ready to attack Iran if we are, and attacking Venezuela and perhaps grabbing the oil and perhaps making the world a better place without this fellow Maduro, who was the head of things in Venezuela. And Trump's right. We do need Greenland in a world of hypersonic missiles that can be here in about 20 minutes. So we do need to look at our security. But is that all that's going on in the world? Well, the answer is no. We're going back to the moon, folks. And we're going back to the moon. We were going to go back to the moon earlier, right at the end of January, early February, and probably are going to head out to the moon by February 10th or 15th. And we're not only going to the moon, true, we're not going to land on it at this point, but we're going to go around 2,500 miles further beyond the moon, which is going to allow us a remarkable picture of the Earth and the moon together. And this is the first time anybody's gone on a manned mission to the moon since December 1972. And are you reading anything about this? Are you reading anything about what NASA has been doing or what SpaceX is doing? But by the way, Elon Musk says he's going to put a man on Mars in another year or two. Whether he can do that or not, we'll see. But he's talking about it. And he also refers to Mars, by the way, as a fixer-upper planet, because Mars is pretty much a clone of Earth without its atmosphere. What happened to the atmosphere on Mars? That's interesting. And is there life on Mars? Well, there has been. Not big walk-around life like dinosaurs and us, human beings, but microscopic and so forth. You know, in our landings on the moon with unmanned roving vehicles who've been drilling around down in the moon and looking and analyzing and sending home to the Earth, we pretty well proved that, and that's kind of a surprise to people. Anyway, This is the third version of Weekly Pete. And we're going to do these generally about once a week, generally about Tuesday. And these are kind of a throwback to when I used to write editorials for my own newspapers and so on. And we'll see how that goes. One last note. The Washington Post, which lost its way a long time ago, along sort of the New York Times, and became a little too liberal and a little too having blinders on opposing thoughts and views, and have paid the price in terms of circulation. And the Washington Post, which is now owned by Jeff Bezos, who owns and started Amazon, is laying off now 1/3, 33 1/3% of all of their employees. This is a death spiral. They don't have a business plan. When they failed to endorse Kamala Harris in 2024, 250,000 of their subscribers canceled. Well, come on, folks. Is that the only reason you were reading that newspaper? In fact, was there only one reason why you were reading all my newspapers way back there before I sold them in 2007? Is that the only reason? You got one reason? And then you cancel because you don't want to hear opposing views? Oh, dear me. I don't know what to say. But I will be saying more. But not today.